One of the things Joe had asked me to do is to kind of like introduce myself, my background. So, as he mentioned, I'm a licensed psychologist. The bulk of my work has been with, addiction and people with severe and persistent mental illness. I've held administrative positions with Allegheny County when we lived out in Pittsburgh, but I've dealt with a range of different things. I've done some private practice as well. And throughout my life, I've kind of been interested in different types of spiritual approaches and things of that nature, though not heavily into religion as such. So with that being said, let me go into what I experienced. My experience took place a year ago this past January. I went in for an outpatient surgical procedure, went home, and did not seem to be doing all that well afterwards. Roseanne called the doctor's office and got the thing, the different symptoms I had. This is normal, this is to be expected. But I was deteriorating. I had no appetite. I was nauseated. It was just all kinds of stuff happening. So, 4 days after I came home, Roseanne tried to get some food into me, and the next thing was I was vomiting up blood. And she said, "This is not normal." So she took me to the emergency room. I went in. They did tests and everything. They found I had a urinary tract infection, but then upon further testing, they found out, I developed sepsis, that this infection had gotten into my bloodstream, etc. And I guess it was later that evening, she can tell you, because I was just so out of everything at that time, I went into, septic shock. And for the next few days, I guess it was about the next 4 or 5 days, I remember practically nothing. They'd wake me up to try to get me to eat, etc. But that's about all I remember, during that time. I just was, as soon as they were through with me, I'd be just out again. And during that time, I had what I call chapter 1 of my near-death experience. I guess technically you could say I had 2 near-death experiences, but this was chapter 1. And I know the sequence of what happened, whether it all happened at one time, whether it happened over several days. All these different, pieces of it, that I don't know. But it started off with me and it wasn't the tunnel that they talk about. I was sliding through between 2 layers of clouds, probably about 10 feet apart. And I was just feet first going, through this. And, I was kind of like, what's going on? The next thing I knew, I was in this sea or ocean or whatever of black liquid. And the effect of it was churning, it was going in different directions, I was being tossed here, there, and everywhere. The only way I keep trying to think of ways to make this understandable to people. It was like being in an ocean-sized washing machine, where, it's just churning, going back and forth, being thrown here and there, having no reference points because it was all dark, and not knowing what's happening. At the same time, going through such torment and agony beyond what I could ever have imagined before. I know if somebody had tried to explain this to me before I had it, there's no way I could grasp. It was like I was being pulled apart inside. There was like an emptiness, a feeling of abandonment. There was no, I thought, I cannot be alive. I must be dead. No human being no alive human being could endure this. It was just too much. It was just so overwhelming. And then finally, I just said, because of this agony, I said, God, please let me die. I can't take this. It is just too much. And then what happened was a vortex formed in front of me. It was horizontal, and I felt myself being sucked toward it. And as I was being sucked toward it, somehow or other, my consciousness stayed behind, and I saw my body, sucked into this vortex. Then the next scene, emerged, which again, I don't know time frames or whatever, but I found myself in this void, total darkness, but there was some source of light because, though I couldn't see it, because I looked down towards my feet and saw myself standing on a door jamb. It was just there, suspended in space. And when I looked down, I almost lost my balance, and I regained my balance. But it's like, now what is this about? This total void. Now, there was no end of it that I could see, but for some reason or other, I felt I was in some kind of sphere. But I was standing there, and it's like, what do I do now? Is this where I'm going to be forever? And, and I'm thinking, I just asked to die. And I felt very strongly that if I stepped off, that trestle there, I would die. Not only would I die, I would be totally annihilated. There would be no more me at all. And though I had asked to die, there was no way I was going to give my own life up. I was not going to, destroy myself that way. And so I ended up standing, being there for a while, just taking in this void, wondering what was going on, and just having this sense of nothingness around me. And then it shifted to another scene. And this time, I saw an outline of myself, lying horizontally from the side. Again, everything was dark, but it was a red outline, of my body. And right in my chest, between the heart and my throat, was this brilliant diamond. At least what I took to be a diamond. I thought later maybe it was a star or something like that, but diamond seems right to me. But it was so bright and brilliant that my sense was if you got close enough to it, you'd be blinded. It was just so brilliant. And at that time, I sensed maybe this is a beginning of a new life. Maybe this is the seed of a new life. And then I was there for a while. Then the scene shifted again, and I was in churning waters again. But this time it was like the ocean. It wasn't black, I could sense light being up above me, and I was like, I needed to breathe. So I'm struggling to get to the surface. And then as I got to the surface, I got launched upwards. Again, the sense was like kind of a dolphin, the way they just jump out of the water. But it was just like my consciousness, not my body, just went up out of the water and then went up into the sky and just hovered there. And it was this tremendous sense of freedom, just freedom. And the sky was a golden color, and I could see and again, these details, I don't know. The thing with these near-death experiences, from what I've read and I know from my own, they're more real than anything you experience in this world. Everything stays so vivid. It's like this isn't just a memory. This is part of who I am. If I wanted to try to forget it, I don't think it would be possible. It's just so vivid and so real. But, there was land off in that direction. And again, I don't know if that's supposed to mean something or anything, but there was there. And then I just kind of, hovered in that place. And then the next thing that I can remember was, being back in my bed in the hospital. And, again, I hadn't had any appetite. I hadn't been conscious that much or anything, but I could see the table down at the foot of the bed with breakfast on it. And I started trying to reach for it. And at this time, I was weak. In about a week, I had lost 18 pounds. So, again, not a diet regimen I would recommend, but I was trying to reach for that. And then, Roseanne came over and, moved the table up to me and everything. But I think I said to her, I don't know, but I know I said it early on, I feel like I've been given a new life. So that's pretty much the end of chapter 1. I ended up going to rehab to build up enough strength to go home. Went home, and about a month later, it came back. And she brought me into the hospital. Again, I was weak. I was somewhat out of it. This time, luckily, I was not, I did not have sepsis or anything. It had not gotten into the bloodstream, but I was pretty much out of it. And, they kept me in the emergency room all day because they were trying to get me into, I forget the name of the type of unit it was. It wasn't intensive care, but, they were closely monitoring me. And then, Roseanne was there with me, and, she ended up going home. And then, I went to sleep or whatever. But this time, all of a sudden I was up in the clouds, but the clouds were all flowers. Very billowy and everything. I mean, I didn't have any sense that there was ground under them. This was just clouds of flowers. And here was a very bright light. I sensed that the colors in the flowers were very vivid, but the light was so bright, it was washing the colors out. And that's where, I just experienced this tremendous sense of peace, acceptance, love. I mean, it was just incredible, and there was this presence there. Now, I'm not going to identify it as God. I suspect it probably was, but I'm just trying to narrate what my experience was. But there was some type of presence there. And I just kind of dwelled in that for a while. And then the scene shifted again. And it seems like I was someplace in the Southwest. It was like, an adobe-type village, small buildings and everything. But unlike the desert, there were flowers in the front yards, all of this. And everything was radiating light. It was like there were little pinholes, and like probably no thicker than a hair. There were these beams of golden light emanating, from these flowers. And from the buildings, too, everything that was there. And I just kind of walked around there, and again, very peaceful, very pleasant, and then I was back up in these clouds of flowers again. And now there was like movement. I felt myself coming back into my hospital room through the wall behind my head, and I felt myself slipping or sliding back into my body. But the flowers were still there in my hospital room all around me. And gradually they started fading. And I could start making things out like, the foot of the bed, the table, stuff like that as they started to fade. And gradually everything was just the room again. But I still had this feeling there with me. And I remember lying there in bed just thinking, life is delicious. Why that came to mind, I don't know. But that was the experience. Life is delicious. This is rich. This is great. Life is what it's all about. Everything else is just window dressing, or distraction. The experience of life itself is just so rich. And luckily, or whatever term you want to use, I ended up having an afterglow for months after that. That gradually diminished over time, but it was there as part of me. And, of course, there's all kinds of things about after effects that I'm not going to get into, but, it didn't remain that way. There's ups and downs and ins and outs and everything as after effects of these experiences. It's said that for like 7 years after you have one, you go through all kinds of different experiences, and it takes that long to just integrate them. So it's, you're getting, a lot of things coming at you. But that was basically the end of that for that period of time. Like I said, I can still go back to that place at times, sometimes through meditation or whether, sometimes it just comes back to me, out of the blue. But there's always not, but there's other things that you go through as part of this process, because I feel I'm back here to learn more things. And you learn some of those things through, difficulties and, things of that nature. But I think I've covered pretty much everything, but we can go from there.
Do you want to share a little bit? Yeah. We'll have some questions.
Well, my experience hasn't been quite the same as Les's, and fortunately, we're able to share it now. But from the family, Joe asked me to share a little about the family perspective on all this when someone has this kind of an experience, because it does affect your relationship somewhat, and it's a very, very unique. Les and I just celebrated our 36th wedding anniversary, so I think we're attached for the duration. I don't know if that's good or bad for you, but I'm the lucky one. Nevertheless, when he went into the hospital the first time and was going through what we've talked about as a pretty horrible experience, the first one, I can share a little bit of some of the observations that I had that were very different about him going through this. And he's had some illnesses, and we were in a very bad car accident, and so we've gone through some pretty tough times physically, and nothing like this occurred. Les loves to listen to soft music. He always, I'll switch on CNN, and then he switches it to the soft music on Fios, and things like that. So I'm sitting in the hospital with him. The first thing that I can say is he absolutely did not want any light on, which was really fun because it was pretty dark, So, and they always have a little TV there for you. So I put the television on for him, and they have a channel where they have really nice, quiet, soft music. he could not stand the sound of that music, of anything soft. I switched, there were a number of different stations that had, and things that I know he would like, couldn't stand it. The only thing I could get from him was turn it off, turn it off. And my suspicion is that's when he was going through all that turmoil and just couldn't stand anything external. At that time, I didn't know how sick he was. I suspected he was pretty sick because when doctors come in every 2 hours, and I think you're pretty sick, I didn't think he was near death because he wasn't in intensive care, and I thought that's where they take you when you're in that kind of shape. When he came home, of course, we were focusing on his rehab and getting him strong enough to get him home and everything else. When he got sick the second time, I knew about this infection. I knew it killed 1 in 3. So, of course, as soon as he started to exhibit symptoms, we were in the emergency room. And then, he sitting there for about 10 hours in the emergency room, watching his heart race. It would go way up high, like 160, and then down to 50, and all over the place. I was getting frantic, thinking, this is probably it. This could be very well the end. He, on the other hand, was very serene. So I have no idea if what was going on, had anything to do with what he was experiencing internally. But those are just some of the observations that I could make, with regard to this. Also, from the family perspective, the whole time, from the time he, we knew he was going to live, and, through his rehab, and this rehab took almost 6 months till he started to really get back on his feet. That was really the main discussion that we were having, is getting him well and getting him strong again. Never did we talk about a near-death experience. I think everybody has heard of them, and generally, you think of them as being the light, at the end of the tunnel, and he didn't mention that he didn't even think about this as being a near-death experience until we had gone to a family event, and one of my cousins asked him about his experience, and he was describing this to her, and that's how we kind of got the interest and the knowledge that he probably did have a near-death experience, because she was reading Eben Alexander's book at the time and referred us to that. And so we both read the book, and then Les has done a lot more reading since then. I don't know if any of you have had a family member who has experienced something of this sort, but my reaction to discussion, and Les and I, over the course of our marriage, probably the one strong point is we have always had very deep discussions about everything. And this has not been a topic that I've been very open to discussing. Now, that seems rather strange. I'm more open now than I have been in the past. I'd say in the last 4 to 6 months, I've kind of opened up a little bit. But for the family members, this experience is painful, because you're watching this loved one, die before you. So bringing this all back is not a pleasant experience. So if any of you have had that experience, I don't know, and I don't know what the experiences of family members, in Eben Alexander's book, a lot of the external factors that are described were told to him by family members, but I don't know how long it took family members to even want to discuss something like that. So having, I'm just going to share this about this center, having a place for people to share these insights and experiences that they've had can be very helpful, because even if they have a loved one who is nearby, they're not always feeling the love that the person who's had that NDE has felt. So it's been quite a journey for both of us, and I think the journey will continue over some course of time. I'm just going to share one kind of funny insight. Forever, I have a lot of challenges as far as anything that's electric. You know, computers, electronics, anything like that. I can't work the VCR, I can't do any of those kinds of things. And we always had something I always laughed about. I said, gee, if we ever split up, Les would get everything, because I can't work it. Well, since his NDE, we have had, I think, 4 FiOS boxes just die on us. And he's always been very into computer and doing things with the computer for, since the first home computers came out. Always could get into the works and fix them and anything without any experience. Well, all of a sudden, every time you get on the computer, it won't work. Something's wrong. It's been it's been kind of terrible in our house because he can't rely on me, for sure. So that's kind of been like one of the funny after effects of his NDE. But it's been a journey, and I'm sure we'll be sharing that journey I hope to be sharing that journey with him for quite some time.
Les, why don't you join her, and then we can open it for questions. So we'll take a little while for some general questions and answers before we break into small groups. So we'll open the floor, and if you would repeat it so everybody could hear the questions.
When you were in the washing machine ocean, did you feel scared?
Okay, the question is, when I was in that washing machine type thing, was I scared? I was terrified. Like I said, the torment, the anguish, the sense of abandonment. I mean, I felt totally lost. I had no reference points, no way to make sense out of this. Yeah, I was that's why I ended up saying, God, let me die. It's just too much. It's too much for anybody to handle.
Do you find that afterwards that you're more attuned to the sixth sense, or seeing spirits, or psychic energy, or that?
Okay, the question had to do with, did my sixth sense develop? Did I see, beings or energy and stuff like that? Well, in reference to that, there's one piece I did leave out, and I don't know when this happened, but I did have a memory afterwards of like being out in the universe, like in the center of, the universe, and seeing all kinds of flows of energy going here, there, every place else, just weaving. And, some of that was going through me as it was going in and around everything else. So I did have an experience like that. But at the time, I didn't see any beings of light like a lot of people do. Since then, I have sensed presences, I have seen things, I've had many different experiences of God. And I guess this is part of what happens, when they're talking about for the 7 years afterwards, you start having these things. At first, they were like little, I'd call, like little blurbs almost. I'd get, I call them experiential insights, different ways of experiencing life, reality, viewing things. They would come. Now, they're more expanded, they're more extended. But yes, I'm continuing to get things like that. And this seems to be something that a lot of people experience. But at the time, mine didn't have those features to it.
Two questions. When did you take up meditation, and what your experience with that might have been, and why have you not written a book?
First of all, I mean, I've been meditating for years, not always consistently, but off and on. There's been, various approaches and things. Before this happened, for decades before. I mean, I got into like Tai Chi back when I was in my 30s, and that kind of opened me to different ways of, experiencing and meditating and Qigong and a number of different things like that. Why haven't I written a book? I'm still trying to make sense of what happened. I mean, that's the key. One of the key things is, as Roseanne mentioned, I didn't know I had an NDE. As a psychologist, I was trying to figure out what could possibly be causing this. Where did this come from? Where did it emerge from? What does it mean? It was just unfathomable as to what happened. And then, when her cousin mentioned Eben Alexander's book, and she did that, she said, you've got to read this book because your experience is somewhat similar to his, because he was in that muddy Jell-O type thing. And, I said about the ink and, this dark fluid. And so she said the similarities. And, I mean, at the time I thought this may be a little far-fetched, but hey, it's worth exploring. But then as I started doing that and reading more about NDEs, I mean, I have no doubt, and especially the thing that is mentioned so often with regard to them is they are more real than it. I mean, as I was talking about there, it's still vivid to me, still very vivid. It's not like a dream that you remember. There's nothing in my life I remember as vividly as that.
My question is regarding the timing of this experience. While Roseanne was observing you and you were going through these chapters, were you awake? Were you coherent? So when you were observing, he was actually there in communication, but thinking and dreaming about something else? I'm trying to figure out what's going on simultaneously.
Your question about what I was observing externally while he was going through this internal experience.
Was he awake?
I would not say he was really awake. You could get him to respond a little, but we couldn't have a conversation. I kept saying, "Are you in pain?" And he just would kind of, So he was. I wouldn't say he was in a deep coma, but he was pretty out of it most of the time.
And you would mention to me one time too, she said she would look at me lying in the bed and it was like there was nobody there. Like if you see somebody asleep, you have a sense there's somebody there. She said it was like there was nobody there, right?
Yeah, that's true. This woman back there.
My question is similar to hers, but it's after it was over, because you said that you were in this sort of rosy afterglow for months, but that you hadn't told her anything you'd experienced. Was it obvious to you that he was different?
Yes, and I think he is different, and he's pretty mellow now. I would not consider to be a real mellow person, but he takes things in a lot more stride than he ever did before. So, when I get all hyped up about something, he's more, it's okay, it'll be fine. That was not the person before. So, yes, he is different.
Have you given any thought as to why one experience was exceptionally negative, terrifying, and the other one seemed exceptionally positive? Have you given any thought as to why?
Probably should repeat that, since so far back.
Okay, the question has to do if I've given any thought as to why one was negative and one positive, or am I catching it correctly?
Yes.
The thing is, in all the research on this done, they can't seem to find common denominators as to why some people have negative experiences, some people have positive experiences, the types of experiences. They've done, if you go to the IN site, that's the International Association for Near-Death Studies, They're doing all kinds of research, they collect all kinds of information, and I mean, they're asking, you know, what part of the country do you live in? I mean, they're going into fine detail to try to find common denominators and everything. There's nothing that seems to indicate who's going to have a near-death experience, what type of near-death experience they're going to have, what the reaction to it is going to be. I mean, some people who have hellish experiences say, this is the best thing that ever happened to me. There are people who have wonderful experience and says, I hate that this ever happened. It's the worst thing that ever happened to me. So I mean, it's, you know, the key thing is that I've come to realize through all of this, through reflections and experiences and these little insights and everything, we each are so vastly unique, we have no idea. There is so much in each of us. We try to see ourselves as being like somebody else, or, you know, that we are so unique, each of us. And that's what's going to happen. That's what is reflected in these experiences. There's two common phrases I've come across talking about this. One is, most people seem to feel they got what they needed. You know, whatever it is, whether it was a negative, positive, whatever. Like when I first realized this was an NDE, I was like, well, gee, why didn't I have this? Or why didn't I have that? My feeling right now is I got what I needed. The hellish thing, through meditating and dialoguing with this higher being and everything, I think that was to shatter my ego. That's what I think the basic purpose of that was. That was, I mean, it ripped me apart. It left me with nothing. You know, my ego has come back to some extent, not as strongly as it was before. I mean, but the point is, I'm not invested in that anymore. And the other one is, you get what you expect. You know, and a lot of that has to do with background. Christians get more hellish experiences than atheists. Atheists, for some reason, have more life reviews, which is something happens to a lot of people. They get more life reviews than, you know, other categories. Because, I mean, some studies have been done with that as to different groups and what's more common to some than to others. So, I mean, the thing is, near-death experiences, which I never realized before, is the most researched subjective experience in the world. There's volumes of information available. You know, it's, you know, and like I said, I've only scratched the surface. Oh, and your question before, why haven't I written a book? It's too early for me to do anything. Oh yeah, I think I did mention that. I was trying to make sense of it. But it's like there's still so much to learn. I mean, I've just scratched the surface. I mean, in some ways, I felt uncomfortable about doing this at this stage of the game because, in some ways, I'm just a babe, you know, in terms of coming to grips with this. And, you know, and I look, you know, I hope to find other people to share with and explore this with, because they could probably help shed a lot of light on things to me, too. Yes?
I want to ask you about your spiritual experiences prior to having that. Were you a spiritual person? Would you?
Yeah, yes and no. It's not like I wore it on my sleeve or anything. I mean, you know, I did. You know, I searched various, you know, spiritual approaches. I was always fascinated with that. And, you know, and again, you get what you expect. I don't know. I see a lot of things now in terms of my experience that I see so many facets of God. You know, in the Jewish Kabbalah, there's the 72 names of God, which each express something unique. You know, there's religions that you know, various spiritual approaches where they have many gods and goddesses. Each of those, and I think these came through experience. It's not like somebody sat down and came up with them in their head. they experienced this higher reality in different ways and had to find some way of expressing it. So whether it's gods and goddesses or names, because, in the Hebrew tradition, the name, kind of contains the essence of something. There's just so many different, the richness of this whole thing, it's just like, that, likewise, in terms of experience, that peace I felt. Now, this seems, I guess to some people may seem strange as far as speaking of peace, where you kind of think it's just nice and mellow. That peace was intense, but it was still peace. It was like the integration of all kinds of elements. And again, it's difficult speaking about some of these things, trying to find words to express them.
Let's take one more question, and then we're going to break up into some small groups. Please, you had your hand up.
I wanted to know what your advice is for us to live in our lives, and if you had an experience, what our, as humans, what our purpose is here. Is that
The one thing that comes up of what's the message for life? When I came out of this experience, it came down to, I have to find some way to bring this into the world. And the message that everybody comes away with, they say all these different, is anywhere, depending on who you read, 15 to 23 different elements of a near-death experience. Just one of them could make it a near-death experience. You could have multiple, but there's no one element that's common to them all. But as far as the message that comes back is love one another. It's all about love. It's not heaven is a happy place or, that. It's about love. It's about a very deep, pervasive type of love that connects us all. If I could live this in my daily life every minute, like I say, a lot of things in life are distractions. The impact I could have. And one of the things I do now is a lot of times when I think of people I know or people who are sick, as soon as they come to mind, I send them love. That's part of my mission right now. Everybody says they have a mission afterwards. I'm older, I don't have a lot of energy anymore. There's a lot of things I can't do as far as going out being a world beater. But I can do that. I can send this love to people. And I've seen results from it too. I've heard of somebody's, who's been sick or something, and I've felt this love, and then the next day I hear, they're feeling a whole lot better. I don't say anything about what I've done because I don't know if it's me or not, but at least it's a way I feel I can make some type of contribution. But that's what it's about. That's the connecting thing. That's the basic message. And it's not always easy. There was one person who had an NDE who wanted to build, some kind of shrine to God as a result of this. And God said to him, I'm not interested in shrines. If it's going to make you feel better, do it. I don't care about that stuff. He says, well, then what should I do? He says, love the person you're with. He says, well, that's pretty easy. And God said, not so. Sometimes loving somebody means you're going to make a break with them. Sometimes it means putting a person in prison. It's not a simplistic, love, that's going to change the world. There's practical realities, there's practical dimensions to that. And it's not like, but it has to come, you have to realize this is coming from the heart. If you're putting somebody in prison, it's not so much a matter of, punishing them or anything. It's like protecting other people. And that's another thing, too, that has struck me through this whole thing, is God is to be found in the strangest places. He is to be found in suffering, in pain. To me, that deepens the reality of God when I experience God there. It's, you know, again, it's just a matter of connecting, and like, oh yeah, as far as suffering in the world, this world is going crazy. We all know that. We see the hatred, the hostility, the wars, the violence, and everything. And a lot of times people like to get, you know, on their pulpits and say, God is punishing. No, God's not punishing. He's trying to wake us up. He's trying to get us to look within, you know, to change from within and start making this world a better place. It's not about punishment. It's about wake up. There's more to life than all this stuff that you're getting caught up in. And it seems that it becomes more and more intense because we're deaf. We're not hearing the message. You know, somebody once said to me, you know, sometimes God gives us a tap on the shoulder to change, and we don't. And then he may give us a nudge. And then finally he has to whack us across the head with a 2x4. You know, and I think there's an element to that. So, I mean, I don't see this as punishment. He's like saying, I love you. I'm trying to wake you up. Why it has to be this way, I don't know. Why he couldn't have made a different universe, I don't understand. But somehow or other, I think it's all to wake us up.